Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm a family practitioner, and I've been practicing medicine for about 30 years in Philadelphia. And I have a private office in the Bella Vista, Queen Village neighborhood down on 9th and South Street. And I'm independent, which is nice because that means I'm not owned by a hospital. And I love family practice. And one of the things that I think is the most important part of family practice is working with my patients so that they can achieve healthy lifestyles and prevent diseases, because we all want to live, long lives, but we want to also feel good as we're living and not be, trapped by, bad diseases that make us feel lousy. So adult vaccines are actually a great topic because it's something that people don't necessarily think about, except maybe for pneumonia and the flu. And there's other vaccines that are very important that adults should be up to date on. And I'm hoping that, people will learn a little bit more and be able to ask their physicians whether or not they're actually up to date on their adult vaccines. Right now, obviously, it's a difficult time because of COVID, getting out and getting things done. But it's actually also a really important time to make sure you're up to date on your vaccines, because if you do come down with COVID, and if you do, I hope it's just a mild case of it, what you don't want is to also catch other things that you could have prevented on top of that and, just be a lot sicker. So moving on with adult vaccines, why do we need them? We've all gotten our vaccines as children. Well, actually, a lot of our childhood vaccines, the immunity ends up wearing off. And things that you thought that you had been covered for, you're actually not. And when you listen to the news and you hear of things like, down at Temple University, 10 students got the mumps and other kids are getting the mumps, the first thing you think about are, well, these are the anti-vaxxers, the people that aren't getting vaccinated. But in reality, that's not really true. What's usually happening is that these kids were vaccinated for measles, mumps, and rubella, and their immunity wore off, and they caught mumps or measles or rubella, and they're bad illnesses to get. So as adults, it's even worse. There's also recommended adult vaccines that people need to get depending on their lifestyle, depending on where they work, if you're a healthcare worker or if you work in a community where there's a lot of sick people, and also your own personal health conditions. People that have had their spleen removed need to make sure that they're up to date on their vaccines. And also if you have certain types of diseases, if you're had a cancer, if you're going through any kind of therapy where your immune system is bad, if you have liver disease, all of these things are reasons to be getting vaccinated for things other than the flu and pneumonia. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about a history of vaccines. Vaccines used to be called variolation, which is not really a true vaccine, but it's the closest thing to vaccines that started back in the history. And back in China, up until 1000 CE, they started using vaccines. And the variolation technique is something that was used for smallpox. Smallpox is really the reason that the interest in vaccines started. What they would do is take a scab from a pox, one of those lesions that you get from smallpox, grind it up into a fine powder, stick it in that straw vessel, and blow it into people's noses. And they found that when people were inoculated with the pox, they would get the disease, a very mild case of it, and they would not go on to get a really serious case of smallpox. Unfortunately, because this is not really done in a very regulated way, you had a pretty big risk of getting a bad case of smallpox, not just a mild case. Plus, if you are doing this to a bunch of people and they are now actively having smallpox, you can induce an epidemic. And things like that would go on with variolation. This is a picture of smallpox if nobody's ever seen it before. It's a pretty nasty disease, which is one of the reasons why over time in history, the medical community really was working hard to try to eradicate it. It not only affects the outside, it also affects you on the inside. And people with smallpox can get brain damage. A lot of people die from smallpox. It's a really nasty, nasty, disfiguring and serious disease. It's airborne, just like COVID, meaning that you don't spread it with your skin. You spread it by coughing on people or sneezing on them. And there was no cure. In the 1700s, variolation was used pretty regularly for smallpox. They would grind up those scabs and blow them into people's noses. In 1721 specifically, the British minister was very interested in inoculating his family, and he did that. And this got back into the United, not the United States, but into the colonies. And we started realizing that we could do things with smallpox to try to prevent them from, hurting a population of people. Cotton Mather, if you remember, was a pretty prominent Puritan minister and involved with the Salem witch trials. But he also published a technique about using the smallpox powdered stuff that you would get from the pox and making a little incision in your skin and rubbing the stuff in your skin. And that would also be a way to inoculate yourself against developing smallpox. And they used that pretty routinely in 1721 during a really bad smallpox epidemic that they had in Boston. And it was quite successful. The real father of vaccination is a doctor by the name of Edward Jenner. And he invented a method to get rid of smallpox that truly was a vaccine. What he noticed was he interned in a dairy farm, and he noticed that the dairy maids really never got smallpox. They would get a disease called cowpox, which is a much less severe form of smallpox, and they would catch it from cows. And most people didn't die of cowpox, but the people that would get cowpox weren't getting smallpox. So what he would do is take some fluid from the blisters of the cowpox, and he inoculated it into people. He used actually a few of the dairy maids he was working with, some of their family members, and what they realized was these people are not getting smallpox, and they developed a smallpox vaccine from the cowpox disease. Cowpox now, we realize, is part of a group of viruses that belong to the same family called the orthopox family. And smallpox and cowpox are both part of the orthopox virus family. And that's why this worked, because when you can inoculate yourself against a disease that's very similar to the disease that you're trying to prevent, a lot of times that will prevent the actual disease. This method of actually drawing fluid from a cow to make the vaccine for smallpox is the way smallpox vaccines were always produced. They were never really manufactured. And large-scale productions of the vaccine continued until close to 1980, when it was finally eradicated. And Wyeth was the company that got involved in making smallpox vaccines. And if you look at pictures back in the day, it's really interesting. It was pretty terrible, actually. You see just rows of all of these calves, and they would take fluid from the udders. They would inoculate them. They would wait till they got cowpox, and then they would take fluid from the udders where the pox were, and that is how they made this vaccine for us all to be using for smallpox. Now what's going on is there's about 27 vaccines that kids get by the time they're 2 years old. And it's crazy. I just know even the difference looking at what my children got, who are now like 31 and 28, and what my granddaughter has gotten. There's a huge amount of vaccines that have been added to the vaccine list. What the companies have done is they have combined a lot of the vaccines so that they don't have to get 27 individual needles, but there are a bunch of vaccines that children get. This is a list of all the vaccines that your grandchildren and maybe your children have gotten. And you can see that even starting in, I don't know if you can see my thing here, pertussis was developed in 1914, then you had diphtheria, then tetanus, and then they figured out how to put them all together in the 40s. oh, I'm sorry, they put them all together, right, in the 40s for a DPT exam, vaccine rather. So early in the first half of the century, people were getting routinely a DPT and the smallpox vaccine until smallpox was eradicated. And then Salk discovered the polio vaccine, which was, pretty revolutionary with what was going on with polio. And then we had measles, mumps, rubella that were combined into one vaccine. Haemophilus is a type of flu that was very deadly. They developed a vaccine for that. Hepatitis B, chickenpox, rotavirus is a very, very bad virus that gives you horrible diarrhea, and people, especially little children, will die very quickly from dehydration if they catch rotavirus. Pneumococcal pneumonia is a very, very bad pneumonia that we vaccinate against. Of course, the flu. You have meningitis, hepatitis A. HPV is the human papillomavirus, which are warts that people get in the genitalia area. But what we have found over the last maybe 10 years is that the human papillomavirus is the #1 reason that people get head and neck cancers. So people that get throat cancer and mouth cancers and tongue cancers, we have found that is actually started because they were infected with the human papillomavirus, probably didn't know that they had it, and they ended up developing these cancers. And then there's meningitis B. There's a few different types of meningitis. So this is how vaccines work. When a bacteria virus comes into our body, they attack and they multiply. And our body recognizes that something came into it that was foreign. And if your immune system is working correctly, you immediately start a whole cascade of reactions that fights off this foreign body that entered your system. And usually you're very successful in doing that. After that has happened and you've gone through your illness, the parts of your immune system will remember what they fought against. And if that invader ever enters your body again, your immune system immediately jumps on it and fights it off to the point where you don't even feel sick. You don't even know that this bacteria or this virus entered you. Your immune system is just doing its job and fighting it off. And what that means is that you've developed immunity to that bacteria or that virus. We're kind of hearing a lot about that now with COVID, because people that have gotten sick, you've developed antibodies against the actual virus. And we're all wondering how long those antibodies last and if you will actually be immune to getting this virus again. And the jury is still out on that. So what vaccines do is they actually imitate the illness, and you are giving your body a little bit of the illness and eliciting a response from your immune system. But the response from your immune system is very small. It doesn't make you sick, but it is enough of a response that you do make those antibodies, which are the memory cells, to remember if you ever get exposed to that disease, your body will fight it off rather than getting sick. It takes a few weeks for your body to actually make the antibodies. It's not an immediate reaction, but once you have developed your immunity, you're good. There's 4 types of vaccines. There's live vaccines, there are dead vaccines, which are inactivated. There's toxoid type vaccines. And then there are conglomerate, I put together, subunit, conjugate, recombinant, and polysaccharide vaccines. So if you're getting a live vaccine, then it's a vaccine that's going to fight off both a bacteria and a virus. It is a living vaccine, although in a very weakened form. It's actually the closest thing to you getting the natural infection. And usually these vaccines are not used for people that have a very bad immune system already. So an MMR, a chickenpox vaccine, those are not given to people that are in active treatment for cancer, let's say, or have known immune problems. Because what would happen is you can give the vaccine and then instead of having just a small reaction, you can have an overwhelming reaction and get the disease really badly just from the vaccine. The inactivated vaccines are also used for viruses and bacteria, and those are dead vaccines. When a vaccine is a dead vaccine, you usually need more than one dose in order to build up an immunity. So the polio vaccine, there used to be an oral polio where they squirted it in your mouth. They've gotten rid of that now. And we just use the inactivated polio vaccine, which is actually an injection. Toxoid vaccines are only used against bacterias, and those are bacteria that produce toxins and poison your body when you're exposed to them. You're actually given a little bit of the toxin in the vaccine. It's in a weakened state, and you do not develop the full-blown illness. And your body learns how to fight off the natural toxin from your immune system just by being exposed to the small amount that you're given in the vaccine. And an example of that would be diphtheria and tetanus. And a Tdap is a combination of diphtheria and tetanus, and it also has the whooping cough, the pertussis vaccine in that also. The subunit and conjugate, et cetera, vaccines, they are used for both bacteria and viruses. These vaccines are only made from certain parts of the actual organism that you're trying to prevent, making you sick. So an example with like the COVID vaccine that they're working on, you might have heard that there is, the way the COVID molecule is, you have like a ball with spikes coming out of it. So all of these vaccine makers are working on different types of vaccine for COVID. Some of them are only identifying that spike, and they're working on a vaccine that you would use. And if the COVID came into your body, the SARS virus rather came into your body, it would recognize the spike of the virus, and you would be immune to the entire virus. So you're not actually making a vaccine that recognizes the entire organism, but just a part of the organism. Usually these type of vaccines, you're going to need a booster for. So your shingles, which is you need 2 shots for the shingles. Anyone that's gotten that probably realizes that. Your hepatitis B vaccines, that's usually a series of 3 shots. And then maybe 10, 12 years later, you might need a booster. And the same thing with the whooping cough. So what are you supposed to be getting if you are an adult? Well, first of all, you should be getting inoculated against tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis every 10 years. So a lot of times that is not really up to date in people until they hurt themselves maybe, or, get cut or need stitches or step on something. And then it's like, oh, wait, do I need a tetanus shot? You want to be getting your tetanus shot and keep it on board about every 10 years. And if you are around young children, especially infants and babies, or if any of your kids have had children, they probably have asked you to go get the tetanus shot again, because it's combined with the whooping cough. And we found that there has been an upsurge in whooping cough, and we're asking everybody to make sure that they're inoculated with this before they see infants or their grandchildren. Shingles is another big time inoculation that you should be getting. Shingles is actually your own chickenpox virus that you have had as a young adult or as a child. And the virus lays dormant in your body after it runs its course, and then it reactivates again for reasons that we don't really know why. And it reactivates in the form of shingles. So wherever this virus was sleeping in your body along your spinal cord, that's the area that it wakes up. So if it was hanging out in your low back, you might notice that you get that strip of a rash that comes around from your low back around to your front. If it hangs out in the back of your neck, you might get a rash that comes up along your face and up towards your eyes. But people's shingles rashes will be in different places according to where their chickenpox virus was hanging out. And the vaccine keeps that virus sleeping so that it doesn't reactivate. Pneumococcal pneumonia is another vaccine that you should be getting. If you are under the age of 65 and you have a few pretty serious illnesses, if you have serious heart disease, if you have liver disease, anything that you're taking medication for, or you know that this is a pretty serious disease that you're living with, you get a pneumonia vaccine before the age of 65. And then you get it again after the age of 65. There is another pneumonia vaccine that has been developed called the Prevnar 13, and that basically is just another 13 strains of the pneumococcal pneumonia that they have, figured out how to vaccinate people for. And that is a vaccine that you only get once. So if you get it before the age of 65, you do not need to repeat that vaccine after the age of 65. You should be getting your influenza vaccine every year because the flu changes. It's not the same. So that is a seasonal vaccine that everybody should be getting once a year. And you should be getting your measles, mumps, and rubella titers checked if you were born after 1957 and your titers are not positive, meaning that you might have had the disease and you didn't mount an immunity response. You should be vaccinated, because what you don't want to do is to be getting measles, mumps, or rubella as an adult, especially an older adult. And the same holds true for chickenpox. The best immunity for chickenpox is to get the disease. Most people that get chickenpox, it's very rare that you're going to not be immune to it, even 70 years later. You should still have immunity to chickenpox. The problem now with chickenpox is that everybody's getting vaccinated for it. So kids are not getting chickenpox anymore. And this is a vaccine that the immunity will wear off. So if you have, your grandchildren are getting vaccinated when they're 30, they may not be immune to it anymore. And if they are not checking their titers and making sure, they can catch chickenpox if they're not getting booster shots. This is just a chart that shows you, the adult vaccines. I don't know why they started with age 27, to be quite honest with you. It's kind of bizarre. But as an adult, I guess I would say, you're getting your flu shot, you're getting your tetanus, you're getting your chickenpox. If you have a bad disease that you're living with, you should be getting a pneumonia shot. And depending on the type of illness, if you have liver disease, you should be getting a meningitis shot, hepatitis shots, and this Hib, which is an influenza shot. Over the age of 50, you start with your shingles vaccine. Over the age of 65, you should be definitely getting your pneumonia vaccine. And they put the MMR down here just to remind people that they should still be getting checked for it, especially if you were vaccinated and you didn't have the disease. So if you have any kind of illness that is immunocompromising, you should be getting vaccines for hepatitis A and B. You should be getting a vaccine for meningitis. You should be getting a vaccine for influenza, Haemophilus influenza, which is specific. That's not the seasonal flu. And you should be getting your pneumonia vaccines. The Pneumovax 23 is the one that you get before you're 65 and then again after 65. And the Prevnar 13 is the one that you just get once, whether it's before you're 65 if you have illnesses, or after 65 just as a senior vaccine. And then of course chickenpox. So are you confused? Because it is very confusing. The best thing that you can do is to speak with your doctor. A lot of times physicians are not as up on making sure that you're fully vaccinated. I think most medical professionals are very, very on top of the flu and they're on top of the pneumonia vaccines. But sometimes we're just not realizing that you might need to be checked for chickenpox, or you might not be up to date with your hepatitis vaccines. So make sure you remind your doctor, are you sure that I don't need any boosters for anything that I had in the past? Or is there any vaccine that you think I need because of where I travel, the kind of diseases I have, the kind of lifestyle that I live? And that's my thing on vaccines. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Yes, I have a few questions. The first question I have, I noticed on your history of vaccines, you listed that the measles vaccine was available in 1955. And my brother and I both got measles in 1963 or 64. I was in second grade. And all my brothers and sisters got the vaccine when we got sick. So I'm puzzled as to why I wasn't vaccinated.
So you know what, the dates that were up there are the dates that they were discovered or made.
So
probably by the time it got on the market and was, you know what I mean, distributed and everybody started using it, you unfortunately probably just missed getting that, you know.
That's what I understand from my mother's comments about us. It's the one time, there were 2 times in my life when I remember being very, very sick, and that was one.
Yeah, I had mumps myself, and that was around 1965, and I think that there was a vaccine, but I didn't get it. You know, I didn't get this vaccine yet because it just wasn't commonplace at that point.
And the other thing I noticed on your history chart was about polio. And again, I was in grade school. I remember my mother traipsing us kids down to the local public grade school for us to get a sugar cube with a red substance on it. And my infant sister got drops in her mouth. But the polio, again, I guess the polio vaccine was discovered before it, we got that in the 60s, the early 60s.
It was oral. They used to do the oral polio, and then it was also, they had put it on the sugar cube, I know, initially, and then it would come in little tiny squeezy things, and they would squeeze it into your mouth. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
But they were able to finally develop one that could be injected rather than oral.
Yeah. And again, the date for that was prior to the early 60s.
Right. Again, that was just when it was made, and by the time it was manufactured and, you know, given out, and, you know, yeah, that's how long it takes. That's why this COVID vaccine thing, people are like, oh, we need a vaccine, we need a vaccine. I mean, I think we're going to have a vaccine probably by the end of the year, but by the time enough people, it'll be manufactured and enough people get it, and it actually will work. It has, you know, you need weeks of it you're not going to really see a whole lot of change in the population because of the vaccine probably until next summer, even if it's developed 6 or 8 months before.
The one thing that does amaze me about the technology vis-a-vis COVID, it sounds as if the technology to develop has sped up tremendously by factors of 10 or 15, it seems, to develop.
You're right. Absolutely right. There's a lot of red tape when you're doing things in the lab on large scales for the government.
I know. I used to work for a business. I used to work for a business that provided into pharmaceutical markets. So I understand what you're saying.
Totally get that, right? So for however they did it, they got rid of a lot of that red tape, and people are able to go from like point A to point B without filling things out in triplicate. And, you know, it just shows you how much time is wasted doing things that you could get rid of, and it makes it go a lot quicker with the vaccine industry. Definitely.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put me back on mute.
Yeah.
Okay. I've unmuted everybody so people can ask questions. If your mic is muted, you will have to unmute it to ask the question. But before we begin, I have a question or a comment from Christopher for you, Doctor, which says that considering the bad results of the 1976 vaccine, how safe can a potential COVID-19 vaccine considered to be? He's expressing concerns that it's being rushed. Do you want to comment?
What was it? Yeah, sure. What was the very beginning that you said, that considering the what?
Given the bad results of the 1976 vaccine, and I'm not sure what he's talking about. Christopher, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. Maybe. What do you mean by the 1976 vaccine? Do we know?
Christopher, you need to unmute yourself. Well, we'll come back when he unmutes himself.
Okay, but I can tell you that as far as the safety for the vaccines that they are, developing now, I'm not concerned at all about the safety of the vaccines. I've been following this stuff really closely. I write an update. I'm always, I've been looking into this a lot with the vaccines. They are, it's so interesting because they have so many different ways that they are going to be able to vaccinate people. As I said before, some of these vaccines are going to be directed at just one part of the virus. Some of these vaccines are going to give you a little bit of the virus. Some of these vaccines have dead virus. It's pretty amazing because they all work differently. But
sorry, I unmuted it.
oh, good. Okay, so what was the 1976?
Well, 1976, I believe it was Ford was president, and they were anticipating, I believe, a swine flu, a virulent virus. The vaccine that was used did not work out well. A lot of people had very adverse side effects. I know someone who suffered very serious side effects, nearly died. And that apparently a lot of people who were opposed to vaccines, apparently it's traced back to that period when it was so unsuccessful. So that's what I was referring to, and that's my concern that this.
Yeah, that is concerning. I actually am not familiar with that. I have to say, I am sorry. I know that there was not a vaccine that was successful with that. Maybe that was why, because of all the bad effects. I don't really know. I couldn't really compare it to what's going on now. I don't want to, talk and not know what I'm talking about. But I can tell you that what they're doing now is it is being tested aggressively on a lot of people. It is not, going to be just like 10 people and then it goes out to the public. I don't know how that compares to what went on in 1976, though, with the other vaccine.
No, I don't know either. I've read about that and I was concerned.
I have a question.
Hi, Fran.
Hi. I had the measles. I had the mumps. I had the German measles, which were really bad. And I had the chicken pox. Now I have had, yeah. And those were the days when people would bring their kids over and sit them in bed with you so that they get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember the blinds being closed in my bedroom when I had I think it was the German measles. Yeah, all those really, it was horrible.
Yeah.
It
But
was
anyway.
the regular measles they did that for. That I
Did they?
remember.
All right, whichever. Anyway, my question is, and I have had my 2 shingles shots, okay? Actually, I had 3. I had one when I was about 60, and then they required the other 2, back to back. So I've had those 2. All right, so I had all these diseases as a child. Do I really need to talk to my doctor about getting an MMR booster or something?
So if you have the diseases, that's really good because your immunity should be great. What I usually do on patients is I draw their titers. So I'll do a blood test when they're getting their normal blood work, let's say for cholesterol or sugar.
Yeah.
And then I will also draw titers, which you can tell if you still have immunity to chickenpox, measles, mumps, rubella, hepatitis. Those are pretty much the main ones you can draw titers for with no problem. And if you have titers, then you're immune. You're good. You do not need to have any booster shots.
Good. My second question is, I heard you mention that the whooping cough is the same as or is included in a tetanus shot. Is that correct? Did I hear you right?
Well, there are plain tetanus shots. There is a tetanus shot that is just tetanus. And then there is a combination shot that is tetanus, diphtheria, and the whooping cough, the pertussis. And that is the Tdap. And that actually is what is used much more often than just the plain tetanus shot.
Okay, I had a tetanus shot a couple of years ago. I don't know what it was, but I do have a new baby coming along, and I know that they want me to make sure and have a whooping cough test.
Exactly. So you want to see if you can find out if that whooping cough was a part of the tetanus shot that you got.
Okay, and that's good for 10 years, I think, the tetanus shot.
Then you are good. You are good. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. This has been very helpful and very informative. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Dr. Bralow, Nick Picone here.
Hey.
Could you explain the concept of herd immunity?
Sure. So herd immunity means that a bunch of people get the disease and then develop immunity to it, so they are no longer passing it back and forth amongst each other because they're all immune. So there is a tipping point where there's a percentage of people that is necessary to actually develop immunity to a disease in order for it to stop being spread from person to person. And therein lies some differences in medical opinion. So herd immunity, the best way to get herd immunity is usually vaccinating a whole population, because then you know that they've all got immunity, or most people have immunity. For something like COVID, there are papers out there saying that the herd immunity percentage of people that would need to get it to develop herd immunity is more like 20 to 25%. And then there are other docs that say it really needs to be closer to 70%.
Wow.
So there really is no right or wrong yet, because neither of them have been proven or disproven. But I can tell you that when people have been surveyed about the vaccine, it's like about 55% of the country has said that they would get the vaccine, and 45% have said that they will not. So it's going to be interesting to see, and if enough people get the vaccine, plus the people that have gotten sick from it, that have immunity, if we will develop a herd immunity, from that. Does that answer your question?
Well, yes. It wasn't really a question. I just get up.
What the explanation is, yeah. So herd immunity is kind of a new term for us, because you don't really hear it. With COVID now you're hearing it because they keep talking about it, but it's an older term, and it basically just means a population of people developing immunity to a disease, whether that comes from actually getting the disease or whether that comes from being vaccinated from the disease. It doesn't make a difference, but you have developed immunity, and then you're not spreading it back and forth.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bralow, Linda
Yeah.
Burke.
Hi.
Is it necessary to get a shingles shot if you've already had the shingles?
Yes, because shingles is not something that you're actually catching like from outside your body.
Right.
So you can develop shingles multiple times, unfortunately, which stinks. It's all about the chickenpox virus. So if you can't get shingles if you have not been exposed to chickenpox. You may not have ever had chickenpox. Like personally, I have never had chickenpox.
I did.
Did you? Yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
people have never had the rash, never really had chickenpox. But then, for women at least, when you get pregnant, they immediately check to see if you are immune to chickenpox.
Mhm.
And I had immunity. So obviously I developed immunity. I was exposed to it. I just never got the rash. And since that's the case, and I had the virus, although I didn't get sick from it, I can still get shingles.
Okay.
So and getting the shingles vaccine is not, it's not 100% you won't get shingles, but it really lowers the risk significantly of getting it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question related to the shingles vaccine. For a while, nothing was available, or none of the pharmacies wanted to deliver it because of COVID. You think there's any contraindication to getting it now?
No.
Okay.
No. They just didn't want people coming into the pharmacies and having that close contact with them to immunize them. Is that what you mean? Probably. Is that what was going on? You're saying you went to the pharmacy to try to get a shingle?
Yeah, I went to, you know what, I was supposed to have it done on March 15th.
Oh, of course, right.
I was busy that day, so I never went. And then, you know, I don't know, sometime maybe in April, I may have said, when I was in the pharmacy getting a prescription filled, you know, I was on the wait list, I got called, they said, we're not doing them for a while. I said, okay, no problem, but I really haven't revisited it. And I just wanted to know, because I know it requires 2 shots. What are they, 6 months apart?
Yeah, I believe that is true.
Yeah, so I have to time it if I'm.
Yeah, that is not, it's not, that's like the pharmacy just saying that, you know, and I think that has to do probably with just the close proximity of their pharmacist being with somebody to give them a vaccination. It's not because of, you know, the actual, you know, catching COVID and then having had the vaccine.
Right, okay.
Vicki, I have a question. If you don't know what you got in the history, I mean, is there any way that they can do a blood test to know all the vaccines you have? And the second one, what happened if you don't remember and you get a double vaccine, like you get a vaccine that you had before, but you didn't know that you had it and now you get it again?
It's a good question. So usually what I'll do is I check, I draw blood on people and I check their titers to see whether or not they have immunity to chickenpox, hepatitis, measles, mumps, and rubella. You can check immunity for that. Even if they were vaccinated, if they don't have immunity, they don't have immunity. You need to be revaccinated. If you get, let's say, your tetanus early, it's not going to hurt you. You know, getting a vaccine again, and it, you know, and you're, you know, it will not hurt you to do that.
So how did you call this tigers? How did you call this?
Titers, T-I-T-E-R. So they're actually, we actually are checking for your body's immune system, the reaction of the immune system to the fact that you had the disease or got the vaccine.
Thank you.
And they routinely ask that, like if you are going to any kind of, like if you go to nursing school, or like when someone comes into my office and they have their physical forms that they need filled out for work or school or whatever. If they are, first of all, going to any school, or if they are going, if this is for a job that involves working with a lot of people or sick people, I automatically check titers. Even if they come in and they bring me their vaccine schedule from when they were, you know, their childhood vaccine schedule, which a lot of people still have, a lot of workplaces will just accept that if you fill the dates in of when you had it. But just because you had the vaccine does not mean that you still have the immunity. So if you're going to nursing school and you're telling me that you got vaccinated for chickenpox, I'm going to be like, okay, that's great. And I'm still checking your immunity, because if you don't have immunity to the chickenpox, you're going to get it again. And especially if you're in a healthcare setting.
Dr. Bralow, I have a question. What's the best date to get a flu shot?
That's a great question, actually, because we just got a notification that that's a big thorn on my side too about the flu shots. I notice a lot of the pharmacies will start vaccinating people like July, August, really early in this part of the country. I personally start giving out my flu shots to my patients in early October, because you want to have a few weeks to develop the immunity, and then you want it to last throughout the whole spring. You don't want to just have the immunity wear off in like March, and then there's a little resurgence of flu in, let's say, April, and you no longer are immune because you had your flu shot in July. So I think that's pretty early to get a flu shot in the summer.
Yeah.
So October, I would say October is really.
But even with the flu shots, you can get the flu.
And even with the flu shots, you still can get the flu. That is 100% correct. It's not an exact science, unfortunately. It's pretty interesting what they do. Like, you know, in 6 to 8 months before our flu season, the flu that we're being vaccinated for is over in Asia, and that's what and it's going to travel over here. And Yeah, it's crazy. And then if, you know, it can mutate a little bit, something else could join that flu and tag onto it. And we don't have a vaccine that's really covering those changes. So that's why, you know, you'll have people that get flu vaccines and they still end up getting the flu. Yeah, it's a big
Do you have
deal.
any idea what the process is for determining what diseases or flu-like diseases are selected for each year that we are going to be immunized for?
My understanding is that at the time zero of the new season, so let's say the way the flu travels, it starts in Japan and travels around the globe. So they literally are drawing blood from people in Japan, and they are seeing, you know, isolating the virus and using that virus to make the vaccine that we're going to get 6 months later when it's traveled through to our part of the country.
All
So, you know, it's different every year.
Right, exactly.
So they literally are taking the live virus that they see, the new virus that's circulating, and they utilize that to actually make the vaccine every year. I remember that whole H1N1 thing a few years ago when that came about, right? Around flu season, it was something that they like added to the flu. That is now added to the flu virus. We get that every year, the H1N1. And they keep checking that to make sure that it's not mutating. That's another type of flu virus. And initially when that was coming around that first year, it wasn't in our flu vaccine. And they made a separate vaccine for that came out like February or March of that year, I remember. And they were having people get inoculated with that. And then in the following flu season, that's September, it was actually added to the usual flu vaccine. So that was a big deal. That's when they were setting tents up outside the ER for people back in. Everyone was getting so sick from the flu. Even though they were vaccinated, they figured out that there was this other strain that was part of the flu, and we didn't have a vaccine for it. We weren't vaccinated.
Do you see this happening to COVID?
There's been actually a lot of mutations with the COVID virus, but they have been very, very small. The mutations when a mutation occurs to a virus that changes it so that a vaccine doesn't work anymore for it, a significant amount of the virus's replicating system, the DNA, has to have mutated. And what's happened with the COVID virus, thankfully, is that very small amounts of the DNA replicating system has maybe mutated or changed, but the vaccines that everybody is working on will still cover all of these strains that, you know, are around without a problem. And that is like actually a really big deal, really big deal. Now, that may change 2, 3, 4 years from now. The COVID virus might look a lot different than it is now, but they're going to be on top of it and keep changing the vaccine appropriately so that we'll be covered for it.
This won't be a one-time vaccine, or will they have?
Yeah, that's up in the air. That is a great question too, and nobody is answering that at this point. You know, whether it's a one and done deal or whether it's going to be seasonal. Yeah, I kind of feel like it may be a seasonal thing. One of the vaccines is actually going to be two vaccines. You need to get one and then a month later get it again in order to actually get the immunity, which is annoying. But, you know, it is what it is.
Will they be so everyone can a reasonable amount of time? New vaccine when it comes out?
When it comes out, yes. So when it goes out on the market, right? So it's going to be the same. It'll be the same vaccine. You just have to get it twice. So if we're gearing towards utilizing that vaccine where it's a 2-step process, there'll be enough. You know, you won't get the first, and then there won't be any available for you to get it a month later. It should not work like that. There should be plenty to get both doses of the vaccine. It's going to be very interesting, actually, to see how this all pans out with the vaccines, to be quite honest with you, because the whole world is working on it, and a lot of different countries together have their fingers in the pot for, for the different vaccines that are being developed. And, we'll see how it's being distributed and, all that. That should be interesting.
Hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon.
Is it possible that the effectiveness of one as opposed to another would be more effective?
Hopefully not. Hopefully they will all have the same amount of effectiveness. And the ones that maybe they're developing that aren't as effective, they won't be using. Like it wouldn't meet it's going to have to meet a certain standard of effectiveness in order to actually be distributed. That is definitely for sure. So if it's not meeting the standards, then it's not going to be used to vaccinate people. Definitely.
Whose standards?
Yeah, I know, right? Seriously.
I don't want anything from China.
I know. Well, they're still quoting China. Let me tell you, I have to tell you, it just amazes me. I mean, China's had 80,000 cases or something, according to China, of this virus. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. We know that's not really true. But a lot of the prominent medical journals keep publishing articles that were, based on data from Wuhan, which, I don't know. I don't usually utilize those at all in my updates unless it's co-authored by someone from another country, because I just don't know how real their data is. And the government came out and said everything that comes through China medically, scientifically, has to be run through the government, and they have to approve it before it's published. So I don't know. That's a little offsetting for me.
Well,
For all of us.
For all of us, yeah.
we thank you for all the good work you do and all the health care.
Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Bralow and for this wonderful presentation. One last question for you. Are you accepting new patients?
I am accepting new patients. I have I'm closing my office at about 400 patients, and I'm approaching that number now. So, if you're interested in joining my practice, I do meet and greets with my patients so that, I can talk about our program, see if it's something you're interested in, if it's a good fit. And I do those all the time for you. So feel free to call, we can schedule that. And I'm on staff at Penn and at Jeff, but I'm independent. So I can fight for you without worrying about being fired. Which is always a good thing, a very good thing, to be quite honest with you, in this day and age anyway.
Thank you very much. I just want to let people know that if you haven't read John Barry's book on the great influenza, the first third is essentially the medical history of vaccines and how medicine developed them, and then it ties it in to the pandemic of 1918 to 1922.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming. We hope to see you at many more Penn's Village Reads. Go to our web page for upcoming ones. Have a great day.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Mark.
Bye.